Okay, Elisabeth, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So, dear colleagues, bonjour, hola, good afternoon, or is it good evening, or maybe good morning, as like every year, you are joining us from different countries to celebrate together the International Women's Day. And I know that we have participants from Australia, and now it is 2:30 a.m. in Australia, so thank you to them for being with us, for joining us now. As president of the Women's Committee of the Union Internationale des Avocats, I'm pleased to welcome you all to this webinar, which we are proud to organize on this occasion. The main topic of our online session today is acting upstream to preserve and advance women's rights. And I'm honored to welcome the president of the Union Internationale des Avocats, Carlo Mastellone, who will start this session with the opening remarks. Carlo, thank you a lot for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Welcome to everyone. Bienvenue. Bonjour à tout le monde. Let me start by saying that our statutes embed the principles of non-discrimination and gender equality. So they're high up in the priorities of the UIA. Donc, dans notre statut, nous avons le principe de non-discrimination et d'égalité hommes-femmes auquel nous sommes attachés. We have approved on the 25th of October 2023 a resolution on sustainability and the role of the legal profession, la résolution sur la durabilité et le rôle de la profession juridique, to create an awareness on SDG and sustainability, and reminding that SDG 5 states that is the achievement of gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls. We've also approved best practice sustainability principles for law firms, le principe de bonne pratique de durabilité pour le cabinet d'avocats. The ultimate aim for law firms wishing to be sustainable should be to ensure that sustainability, and as a key part of it, social and governance, but mainly social goals are embedded into the culture and decision-making framework of the firm, so that they are consistently a factor in how the firm goes about its work and makes decisions. And social means diversity and inclusion. Donc le social, ça va dire social and inclusion, and reducing the gender pay gap and the gender position gap, and encouraging and facilitating a greater number of female lawyers achieving partnership. Donc, le principe de la diversité et d'inclusion dans notre bonne pratique, au principe de bonne pratique de durabilité pour le cabinet d'avocats, c'est d'envisager une politique d'inclusion pour notre cabinet afin de réduire l'écart de rémunération entre les hommes et les femmes et l'écart entre le poste occupé par les hommes et les femmes, et d'examiner comment encourager et faciliter l'accès d'un plus grand nombre d'avocats à la fonction d'associé. We have also recently approved UIA internal, sustainability internal guidelines, la directive interne de l'UIA pour le développement durable, where non-discrimination and equality, diversity, equity, and inclusion should be ensured, so that women lawyers and single mothers with small children, also considering geographical and linguistic diversity, both when we choose our leaders and appoint our speakers. Discrimination against women. There is a long list of international and European treaties against non-discrimination, from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to the United Nations Convention of the 18th of December 1979 on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, and the Treaty of the European Union, down to the Charter, or up to the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, and so on and so forth, until the most recent directive, which will enter into force shortly, to strengthen the application of the principle of equal pay for equal work or work of equal value between men and women through pay transparency and enforcement mechanisms. Despite all this, we are nowhere near the objective of a fair, gender-inclusive, safe, equal opportunity and anti-discrimination civil society. Malgré tout cela, nous sommes loin de l'objectif d'une société civile juste, inclusive, sûre, offrant l'égalité de chances et luttant contre les discriminations. The title of this seminar, Acting as Upstream, Agir en amont, the key word is and remains prevention. And prevention measures should include all kinds of initiatives aimed at cultural change, awareness-raising campaigns to counter discrimination, to counter also violence, and promote fair, inclusive, safe, and equal opportunity and anti-discrimination working environment. Education, developing a healthy and respectful relations, and prevention and creating an awareness and promoting a culture. And aiming also to overcome stereotypes. Donc, le mot clé de la lutte contre la discrimination à l'égard des femmes reste la prévention, et les mesures préventives doivent inclure toutes sortes d'initiatives visant à un changement culturel. And looking at discrimination, which is not limited to the pay gap issue within the legal profession, for women, lawyers, especially those in private practice, we need to encourage disseminating documents, resolutions, policies, codes of conduct to create an awareness similar to the UIA best practice sustainability principles, awareness-raising campaigns and educational projects, a serious engagement, including financial engagements by the Law Societies, Bar Association, National Institutes for Pensions and Social Security. Because DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we are worried to see that these schemes are being sort of prevented somehow by the government in the United States. The DEI is not a favor, it's not a concession, it's not a mere value, it's a statutory right. So, questions, the bottom line, and here we are to today's seminar, we need to continue asking ourselves, and I ask you today, the speakers today, whom I thank, and the moderator, who's this wonderful lady organizing and chairing this wonderful women's committee, so thank you ever so much. But we need to provide replies and suggestions, and this is also to you participants. What can an association such as the UIA do better in bridging the gender gap? What can law societies, bar associations, law firms do to bridge the gender gap? Nous devons continuer à nous interroger. Et je vous demande aujourd'hui de nous fournir des réponses, des suggestions. Qu'est-ce que peut faire de mieux une association telle que l'UIA pour combler le fossé entre les hommes et les femmes? Que peuvent faire le barreau, les cabinets d'avocats pour combler le fossé entre les hommes et les femmes? Merci.
Merci à vous, Carlo. Les questions que vous avez posées sont très importantes. Thank you a lot for your commitment also to act towards ending all violations of women's rights and implementing inclusion, diversity, and non-discrimination in all fields. And the questions you raised, these are the questions that we need to have answers to today in this seminar, or at least recommendations from our speakers and from the participants in order to elaborate an action plan to implement what we want to do to have, which is ending discrimination and violence against women. And of course, the question is, what can the UIA do? We can do a lot because it's an international association with a lot of bar associations, collective members, and lawyers all over the world, but mainly because with you supporting our efforts to promote and advance women's rights, of course, we will do something that will help in ending discrimination and violence against women. Thank you a lot. Now, dear all, while the International Women's Day is a celebration, and it's certainly a day of a great importance and special significance, it's also a reminder that too many women around the world still face violence and injustice, and that we must all join our efforts to put an end to any act of violence against them. Women everywhere have the right to live a life free from all kinds of violence, as we stated clearly in Article 2 of the Charter of Fundamental Principles on Access to Justice for Women Victims of Violence that we proclaimed in Paris on 8 March 2022 on the International Women's Day, so that the right of the victims to have an effective and efficient access to justice is fully recognized and confirmed. Chers confrères et chères consoeurs, à ce jour, 33 barreaux de différents pays et associations d'avocats de différents pays ont déjà signé la charte des principes fondamentaux sur l'accès à la justice des femmes victimes de violences. D'autres sont en train de finaliser les formalités d'adhésion à cette charte. Et nous exhortons les barreaux et les avocats à jouer le rôle primordial dans l'accompagnement et le soutien des victimes. La liste des signataires, tout comme le texte de la charte, sont publiés dans les 3 langues, le français, l'anglais et l'espagnol, sur le website de l'Union internationale des avocats, dans la page du Comité des femmes. Face au nombre toujours important des femmes victimes de violences, et comme cette violence prend de nouvelles formes, souvent pernicieuses, mais toujours dangereuses, il s'avère de plus en plus urgent et crucial d'agir en amont afin de prévenir et d'empêcher tout acte de violence, toute forme de discrimination à l'encontre des femmes et des jeunes filles, et ainsi éviter qu'il n'y ait de nouvelles victimes. À cet égard, et à l'aide de l'intelligence artificielle, nous appelons à la plus grande vigilance quant aux données et informations empreintes de discrimination à l'égard des femmes qui pourraient y être relayées, et cela justement pour éviter de perpétrer des préjugés et des stéréotypes pouvant générer une violence masquée et insidieuse qui peut nuire aux femmes et leur porter préjudice. Donc, we have to act upstream. Agir en amont devient inéluctable. Mais agir avec pour objectif en particulier changer les concepts, les mentalités et les comportements, neutraliser les préjugés concernant les femmes, des préjugés sans fondement mais dont l'impact est tellement préjudiciable pour elles. Agir en amont pour éliminer toutes les formes de discrimination, surtout la discrimination déguisée, notamment dans la sphère professionnelle. Et c'est un objectif à la réalisation duquel nous ne devons épargner aucun effort. Évidemment, cette action en amont que nous lançons aujourd'hui avec vous viendra continuer et compléter notre action continue en vue d'assurer aux victimes, à travers la mise en application de la charte, le soutien juridique hautement qualifié auquel elles ont droit et qui demeure une priorité absolue pour nous. Dear colleagues, change is possible if we all choose to stand up and act. Together, we can make it happen, and we urge bar associations to conduct awareness campaigns aimed at changing concepts, mentalities, and behavior. And as Carlo asked in his speech, comment doit s'opérer cette action en amont, cette prévention? How we shall operate this upstream action? What will be the prevention? Quelles en seront les modalités? Quels sont les moyens les plus pertinents et performants pour atteindre les buts que nous visons? With our distinguished speakers, we will examine these issues and mainly answer the question, how can we prevent violence against women before it happens? What we have to do to avoid having more victims of violence and discrimination? It's not easy to do. Yes, we can do it, and we will do it, with all of us working together and joining our efforts. Our first speaker is Cato Ertz, the president of the International Association of Young Lawyers, l'Association internationale des jeunes avocats, l'AIJA, qui a déjà signé la charte. Et nous considérons qu'impliquer les jeunes dans cette action en amont est important et essentiel, puisqu'il permettra d'opérer le changement voulu en généralisant de nouvelles approches et l'application de nouveaux codes de conduite bannissant toute forme de violence et de discrimination envers les femmes. Je remercie Cato pour son enthousiasme inébranlable à promouvoir les droits des femmes et son engagement à combattre la violence sous toutes ses formes. Cato, you are most welcome and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It is a great honor to be here today. As Elizabeth mentioned, I am here with my hat of AIJA president, and AIJA is the only global association for young lawyers. But I'm also here as a member of UIA. I've been a member for UIA for a couple of years now, and it's a wonderful association. So I could not be happier to combine both of these caps and hats that I wear on a daily basis. It's fantastic to be here, and particularly to celebrate International Women's Day, because as Elizabeth and Carlo already mentioned, it is important to still work for women's rights around the world. And it's a topic dear to my heart. In many ways, I think I'm a privileged woman. I live in the Western world. I have fundamental rights that are protected for me. I can do the job that I love doing. And oftentimes I think to myself, when my grandmother was born, there wasn't even a right for women to vote in my country, in Belgium. So I feel like there has been a lot of progress that has been made over the last decades, for sure. But at the same time, I also feel that we are not there yet, because where people often tell me, oh, you seemingly have it all. I have a career, I have a family. I do sometimes face myself comments that are not welcome at all, where they question my capabilities as a mother for being away so much and working that much, or vice versa, for having not really my aim on my job when I'm taking care of my children. So all this to say that I think, of course, we've made a lot of progress and we have fundamental rights in the Western world, but it's not just about rights. And I think that is precisely the topic that we need to address today, because in the margin of those fundamental rights, there is, of course, the enforcement of rights and also a movement that is creeping up on us a little bit to take away from the rights that have been granted onto women by violence on social media, by comments that are made in the margin of those rights. And I think violence is more than just physical violence against women. Violence in that sense includes also every situation where a woman cannot freely enjoy all of those rights that have been bestowed upon her. Much, much more than just physical violence. It also includes the right to choose where to work and for instance, not having the chances to participate in the labor market in an equal way, and combating discrimination or stereotypes and biases. So I think it's a very important topic. Thank you so much for putting this on the agenda. One of the other reasons I feel, apart from being a woman, that is a great reason to contribute to this topic is the fact that I have children. I have two young daughters, but I also have a son. So I think when we are speaking about young people, it's not just the young lawyers, it's also the next generation. So I could not be more proud to tell them this morning during breakfast that I would participate in this webinar today. And apart from being a woman, I'm also an employment lawyer. So that's the last reason why I want to contribute to this panel, because I think combating discrimination in the workplace particularly is one of the ways that we can address the questions raised in the introduction. How can we prevent violence against women? Well, that's making sure that women can participate in the labor market in an equal way. How do we do that? And I think as an employment lawyer, I've seen a rise in discrimination cases over the years, a very important rise, because this is something that is no longer just a matter of what's in the legislation and nobody really looks at it. It is a societal debate, and more women are standing up, and more companies also want to make sure that they invest in diversity and inclusion. So those are all of the angles that I would like to address today. Next slide, please. First and foremost, I wanted to highlight that violence against women is a global issue. So it's not just something that happens in third world countries, it happens here as well. In fact, the World Health Organization indicates that globally about 1 in 3 women, so 30% of women worldwide, have been subjected to either physical and or sexual intimate partner violence or non-partner sexual violence in their lifetime. So that's enormous, in my opinion, if you look at those numbers. For any one of us, knowing our mothers, our friends, our sisters, our daughters, that means that 1 in 3 has experienced violence, which is simply unacceptable. So prevention absolutely is needed all over the world, not just in parts where you'd ordinarily think that violence against women happens more often. Next slide, please. And here on the map, you actually see a map of Europe. So that's what I wanted to highlight. It's not just happening in third world countries, here also in Europe. There is a widespread violence against women, and it's not just a private matter. Violence includes, as I said already in the introduction, not just physical violence, but it happens in public spaces, workplaces as well. And it could also include harassment, discrimination, anywhere where an unsafe environment is created to limit career opportunities, for instance. That is also a form of violence. Next slide, please. And then, of course, the impact of social media is very, very important. Social media is a way to spread sexist views, unfortunately. And as I said already in the introduction, we have fundamental rights that are safeguarded by laws, and we can go to court if we feel discriminated against. But who monitors what happens on social media? And that's precisely the platform where the rise of misogyny and misogynistic views are being normalized. Think, for example, of Andrew Tate. Many of you know him, perhaps. He is an American and British social media personality, a businessman, a former kickboxer, and he gained notoriety for promoting various positions in the manosphere community. His controversial commentary has resulted in his expulsion from various social media platforms, and it has been raised that he promotes misogynist views to his audience. He has, for instance, spread the idea on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube that women belong to men and must be controlled. And he also promoted the idea that domestic violence can be justified in some cases. So this is a very, very important issue, not only because this happens on social media, but particularly because this speaks to younger generations. He's a young man. He's actually 1 year older than I am. So he's about 39, if I calculate correctly. This is really concerning because it used to be thought that these were views from former generations, maybe, or that older people would still think this way, but it's actually on the rise. So I think it's very important that we have systemic monitoring of whatever happens on the internet so that action can be taken if those views are being spread. And this should be punishable just as much as anything happening in a real work-life environment when people meet in person. It has been confirmed that children watching violent video games or playing violent video games are more prone to violence. Well, the same is true for violence against women, and a correlation between what happens on social media platforms and, people like Andrew Tate sharing those misogynist views. Only 4 days ago, the UN posted on their website an article saying that online manosphere is moving misogyny to the mainstream, which is a really concerning trend as we've seen and as captured by the UN. Next slide, please. So to answer the question that Elisabeth raised at the start of this webinar, how can we raise awareness? How can we combat and prevent violence? Well, first of all, I think it's about breaking the silence, and that's exactly what we are doing here. We are opening up the discussion and talking about the issue. I think that's very important. And then secondly, training and education for everyone in society, obviously, training and educating younger generations, but for us as lawyers as well. We come into contact with our clients on a daily basis, and especially me as an employment lawyer, I get asked a lot about diversity and inclusion policies. Is it useful? What should be in there? So I think we can play a role there as lawyers to help companies also make sure that change is widespread and that there is awareness about this issue. And then, of course, integrated, comprehensive, and coordinated policy measures. And that's where the UIA Charter is a very beautiful example of how lawyers can actively come together and make sure that we speak against violence against women. I'm indeed very proud that Aisha signed the Charter in October last year when we met in Paris, Elisabeth. I think the Charter is a wonderful initiative of making sure that all lawyers around the world, and I hope we'll have many signatories in the future again, but we already have many, know that this is an issue and that lawyers can actively take a great step to create awareness and join forces in combating violence. Next slide, please. So here is a short screenshot of the chart for those of you who don't know it yet, but Elisabeth mentioned it already. I'm sure it's on the UIA website if you want to consult it. Next slide, please. And then from an employment lawyer's perspective, I wanted to start by mentioning some international conventions that are out there that actually encourage countries and members of international communities to take a stance and making sure that legal prevention is there as well, and that there is legal remedy for those who suffer violence, more than just physical violence. First of all, there's the Istanbul Convention. The Council of Europe adopted this convention on preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence. It's better known as the Istanbul Convention, and it's basically considered as a human rights treaty. Women's rights are human rights, and it opposes violence against women and domestic violence. The signature was opened on the 11th of May in 2011 in Istanbul in Turkey, and meanwhile, I think 47 countries have ratified it. But what's interesting there is that it's that Turkey, actually, the place where it originated, withdrew from the convention, which again highlights the importance of discussing this topic today. The second one is the International Labour Organization Violence and Harassment Convention. And I think it's very interesting to mention this one, not just because, as the Istanbul Convention, it obviously condemns violence against women, but it translates that into the employment law context. It gives a definition of what harassment is, and it defines gender-based violence and protects workers and everyone who engages with other people in a work-related context. So that's a very broad application field, and all of the members of the International Labour Organization are required to take the necessary steps in combating discrimination. Next slide, please. So basically, institutional discrimination fuels gender-based violence, as I said already, because violence is not just physical violence. It also means that people are prevented from participating in the work sphere in an equal way. And of course, effective anti-discrimination and well-being legislation is essential to safeguard women's rights. An example in Belgium, for instance, is the Well-Being Act that aligns with all of the objectives of the ILO Convention, ensuring that workplaces are actively preventing and addressing violence and harassment. And we also have, obviously, anti-discrimination legislation, as I'm sure many other countries have as well. It's not just about making sure that these legal principles are in place, but also that they are effectively enforced in courts. And that's what I mentioned already. As an employment lawyer, I see a rise of cases like that. We've had anti-discrimination laws in Belgium since 2007. So this in itself is not new, but almost 20 years later, we see that more and more in labor courts, we have cases regarding anti-discrimination. We have broadened the scope of our anti-discrimination legislation, which basically says, for instance, now that you can accumulate compensation for discrimination based on different protected criteria, that you can also claim compensation if you're being discriminated against, not because you yourself have a protected criterion, but because you are, for instance, taking care of a disabled child, and that therefore you are being discriminated. So the trend here is that the legislature is opening up remedies for individuals seeking compensation for discrimination. And I really think that this is inspired by a general trend in society, and a general trend in society only comes about if people talk about it. So it's really a circle and a loop that goes on and on. But it's interesting to see, as an employment lawyer, how much this has gained in importance. Next slide, please. And then, of course, it's not just about enforcing legislation and making sure that there's no discrimination in the workplace, but it's also about ensuring diversity and inclusion in the workplace, which goes further than just non-discrimination. Regrettably, as Carlo mentioned already, in some countries around the world, D&I is seemingly no longer existent, but it is so important to make sure that rights are effectively safeguarded. We have, for instance, the Equal Pay Directive, where equal pay between men and women is ensured, and that's, of course, in Belgium also laid down in a collective bargaining agreement that's binding on all employers. I saw a funny reel actually the other day that said that women were tricked into thinking that having it all is great. Of course, having it all is great. Having a career and having a family and having equal rights is great. But they said, funnily, that we don't only want equal pay, we want equal enjoyment of those rights, which is one other thing. Equal representation representation is just as important, that diversity in all levels of organizations is promoted. I'm, for instance, very proud to say that at Aisha, we have 49% of our membership that is female, and over 50% of all of our leadership roles are held by women. We are very proud of that, and I think that should be a good reflection of society going forward, and that's why it's important to have an association of young lawyers actually take the lead there. And training and education, I mentioned that already. Particularly on unconscious bias, because what that basically says is unconscious. You don't know that you have the bias, and sometimes it's very interesting also for women themselves to be pointed in that direction. To give one personal example, I used to be so very proud to mention to anyone who wanted to hear it how much I had worked 3 months only after giving birth to my children. And now I say the exact opposite. I encourage people to take maternity leave, to take the time they need. And it's needed that people talk about that in a sense that highlights the possibilities there are as well, and actually making use of the rights there are. Next slide, please. The role of young lawyers, I would say, let me start with the role of lawyers in general, and then I'll focus on what young lawyers can do. I think lawyers have a unique position in society where they can contribute to raising awareness. As I said already, we come into contact with clients on a daily basis who seek legal advice on what discrimination means and what risks there are. So contributing to raising awareness is one of the things we can do. We can also support victims. One of the things I've engaged in personally is to pro bono work for an NGO who has sought legal advice on what harassment in the workplace means. Obviously, NGOs don't have giant budgets, but if we all do our little part and engage in pro bono work, even if it's just 1 hour a month, to help organizations who are combating discrimination and gender-based violence, that's already a great start. And a third pillar is assistance strengthening policies. There I would like to mention the initiative of the World Bank Group, who basically, they support many fields, of course, around the world. But one of the initiatives they've taken is to conduct a global survey every year of making an inventory, basically, of what the rights are of women all over the world. And then they compare that from one country to the other, from one jurisdiction to the other, and where they find that there are gaps, they actively lobby for new legislation to be put in place in that jurisdiction. And they do that with the help of lawyers worldwide. So this survey is answered on a pro bono basis by lawyers worldwide. And I've participated for that in Belgium. And that's a very specific example of how you can contribute as a lawyer to making sure that we combat violence against women, because you provide your knowledge that is already on a shelf, if you will, in your law firm. You provide that knowledge into a survey that is used for very, very meaningful purposes, and making sure that legislation around the world becomes more balanced everywhere. And then, of course, actively challenging systemic issues. And that's what we're doing today during this webinar, talking about it, raising awareness and making sure that the problem is known. Next slide, please. And then the role of young lawyers in particular. I think, as I said already, it's not just a story of the past. We are not there yet. I find it very, very important that young lawyers engage internationally, hence the importance of Aisha and joining an association like ours, where you can engage with people from all over the world, because it broadens your understanding of the issues around the world. And if you engage with other lawyers, you will see that the idea that we've made it to fundamental rights and we're there already is just not true. I already gave the example of Andrew Tate and the misogyny being on the rise. We actually have as a topic for our panel during our next annual Congress in Washington, D.C., hosted by our Human Rights Committee and the Aisha Women Network, misogyny on the rise, basically, and how we can combat that. So I think young lawyers, because they are the future of the legal profession, have a particular duty in making sure that we keep our eyes and ears open and participate in discussions like this one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kato. It was really interesting. You talked about many things regarding combating violence against women and how to work on prevention, and you focused mainly on the workplace. And I totally agree with you, especially that you have in the workplace some unconscious biases that are really impacting women in the workplace. And this we need to work on. To end this discrimination against women. And we have started to talk about it when we proclaimed the charter. And there's a lot to do there because nobody feels that this is unconscious bias, but it's there. And so we need to make people be conscious about these biases. They are here and they act according to these biases, these stereotypes. And this is very violent for women. This is what we need to work on in the prevention, as you said. And then we talked about enforcing the laws, legislation. Yes, this is very important. Maybe some countries have advanced in the field of legislation concerning social media, concerning artificial intelligence and the algorithms on artificial intelligence, and who's monitoring what is fed in artificial intelligence regarding women. While there are also stereotypes, biases that are very bad for women and for their rights. So we need legislation, and for the existing legislation, we need their enforcement. And this is where lawyers can do a lot. And this is where Internationale des Avocats can assist and help because we have collective members and we have lawyers all over countries, and we can work all of us to advance women's rights in this field. So thank you for your recommendations and for all you talked about. Yes, there is plenty of things to do, but at least, as you said, we're discussing it and we're getting a lot of ideas. And this is what will help in elaborating an action plan, a strategy to implement this prevention. And then maybe soon, or maybe, I don't know, I hope it will be soon, we will put an end to violence against women and to discrimination, and starting with the workplace where really there's a lot to do. Thank you a lot, Kato, for this presentation. And now we will have our second speaker. But before that, I need to say to the participants that at the end of the presentations, there will be a time for a Q&A from the participants. So if you have any question to ask to any one of our speakers or to all of them, kindly write them in the Q&A box, and then we'll relay them to the concerned speaker. And if you have also some comments, because as Carlo Mastellone said, all of us, we need to work together on combating violence and on implementing the prevention measures that we need. Now, our speaker is Alex Talon. He's joining us from Brussels also. He's member of the Brussels Bar since 1981, and he's the vice president of the CCBE, Council of Bars and Law Societies of Europe. He's the former president of the Brussels Bar Association. He's a member of the editorial board of the magazine L'Ingénieur Conseil and the magazine Today's Lawyer, and the director of the collection Concurrence et Pratique du Marché. He is the past president and still member of the board of the Association for the Study of Competition Law. Alex, thank you a lot for being with us today, and la parole est à vous.
Merci, Elisabeth. Thank you, Elisabeth. Yes, and first of all, I want to say that I'm very pleased to be here, very honored also to be here, and I want to congratulate also all what you do, Elisabeth, and the UIA Women's Committee for the defense, and also to combat and to fight against the discrimination against women. And what I also want to say as introductory remarks is that I'm speaking in my proper name, in my own name, as a vice president, of course, of the CCB, but not on behalf of the CCB. So what I will do in my presentation, I have no slides, but I think the text of the presentations will also be sent to the participants that I read here, of course, all participants, after this seminar. I will focus on the position of women in the bar association and in the law firms, and the discrimination that is still existing and is recognized, of course, also by much of studies and analysis. And I think all form of discrimination is also a form of violence against women. And I think that it is also important to focus on the bar associations and the law firm, because as lawyers, as Kato says, we have, of course, a privileged position, but we also must be an example for the rest of the society in the manner that we address and handle this what I can call as a problem. So, and this question of discrimination in the profession between the gender discrimination is something that is raised since long in bars and also I think in law firms as it is in European and international lawyers organizations. But of course, this situation is something that goes beyond the legal profession as such. And I want first, before to focus really on the profession, underline that the role of the women in our patriarchal societies, because that are we still, not only in and also in Europe and I think in all of the world, unfortunately, it makes that the role of women is very compartmentalized. That we still have what we call then traditional couples, where the man is given the financial burden of the household and the woman a operational burden, as I can call it. And that is, of course, from my point of view, the real problem, because even when woman contributes to the financial burden by exercising a profession, she has not abandoned a role as housewife, between brackets, the person in the couple who is responsible for the house and also for the children. So let us above all try also in our profession, and we have many men and wife who are both advocates or lawyers, so each at their own level try to change this role play that is established within too many families. And we can see that I think this is changing also with the younger generations and perhaps more quickly in some countries than in some other countries. But also we must see and observe now that for some politicians, not only on the websites and not only on retail, but also some politicians, the gender equality is not on the agenda at all, and that they would go back to what we can see as the more traditional sharing of tasks in a couple, and that we, of course, is the basis of the problem we are addressing today also. And so we must remain attentive to any political drift that would be a step backwards in a fight that is far from being over. But when we speak about the place of women in our profession, as such, that we speak about that. And even if the number of women lawyers has increased, we must observe that their place in the organizations representing the profession on the one hand, and that in the governing bodies of law firms on the other hand, is far from being equal. In my country, Belgium, the largest bar association is just as the French Bar of Brussels, the French Council of Lawyers of Brussels, has just elected a little less than 1 year ago its first female president. At the CCB also, we are not giving the example for the moment. The representative delegations of the member bars are composed of more than 70% of men, and the Belgian delegation is, I must admit, does not set an example either. And also the presidency of the CCB, I'm a part of it, I can say that, but we were now since 2 years only men in the presidency, and since this year we have luckily a female third vice president, Imbi Jurgen from Estonia, and I hope that we can go further to a more and a better representation also in the presidency. And I see also in the CCB you have much committees who are tweeting and who are addressing lots of course items and problems concerning the profession. We have not, like the UIA, a committee solely dedicated to the problems of discrimination based on gender, but that doesn't mean, of course, that this item and this subject is not at all addressed. On the contrary, it is integrated also to analysis of discriminatory situations in general. And I can give you some examples of that. I will not go to 5 examples where this is addressed, and to show that in all these examples we must also observe that even if the position and the numbers of women are increasing in the profession, their place is not at all for the moment equal to men. That's an observation that we must do. So in March 23, the CCB published a report on corporate social responsibility and legal profession. I think also Carlo said there is, of course, a link between corporate social responsibility and the position of women in bar associations and in law firms. And there, the section 4 of this report focuses on CSR standards relating to diversity and inclusion by highlighting the benefits of an inclusive approach in the profession. This report observes that even if there has been a gradual increase in the proportion of women lawyers over the past decade, rising from 35% in 2004 to 43% in 2015, number of women progressing to partnership or to elite levels in the advocacy profession is still very small. And the true diversity and inclusion in law firms require, and that is important, I think, more than just creating policies and programs. This is, of course, sometimes window dressing also. This can be for bar associations, also in law firms, to have some window dressing on diversity. It is not only policies and programs, it must be, of course, implemented also very concretely and practically. Second example is in June 2024, not so long ago, there was an overview published about the attractiveness of the legal profession, and that was by the Young Lawyers Committee, because we have a Young Lawyers Committee not so long ago, created in the CCBE. And some pages of this overview deals with trends by gender. And there also they observe an increasing number of women in the law profession. This most responding jurisdiction, says this overview, the proportion of women in the legal profession is rising. This can be observed by the changing proportions in the composition of the legal profession, and even more so when observing the trends in taking up studies and graduation. And we have that per country. You will find that back in my in the documentation you will receive afterwards. Also, then a couple of years ago in 21, the CCB, together with the European Women Lawyers Associations, organized some roundtable about gender and the legal profession. The title was "Where We Are Now, Where Do We Want to Be, and How to Get There." And there also the main topics of discussion focused on the situation of the legal profession in Europe with regard to the representation of lawyers in law firms, chambers, and the challenges to achieve gender equality. The CCB also followed the evaluation made by the CEPEJ. This is the European Commission for the Efficiency of Justice, who published every year an evaluation report, and the last edition was published on 16 of October 2024. And there the following trends were noted. While the average proportion of women among judges and public prosecutors is over 50%, this is not the case among lawyers. Most lawyers in Europe are men, 56%, but the percentage of women has grown since 2018 in several countries. By 2022, 12 member states have a majority of women lawyers. That's Andorra, Bulgaria, Cyprus, Estonia, France, Greece, Hungary, Ireland, Malta, Poland, Portugal, and Romania. And there were 7 in 2018 and only 10 in 2020. And the second part of this evaluation is give the country profiles, individual country profiles, and presents also key data with always important indicators for each country, because I think when we address that sort of of items and this gender discrimination, it's also important to have the information about that, to be documented. And the fifth example I can give is an older example in 2017, where also the CCB contributed to a study that was commissioned by the European Parliament Committee on Legal Affairs, a study mapping across all 28 EU members at that time, 28 EU member states, the representation of women and men in legal professions. The aim of this study was to identify areas where women or men are currently underrepresented and to analyze the underlying reasons and constraints. The main obstacles were identified as follows: implicit gender bias, difficulties in balancing personal and professional life, I already spoke about that, a paucity of effective mentors and support networks, and then hitting the glass ceiling. This is characterized as an unfair system or set of attitudes that prevents women from obtaining upper level positions. And I give also in my written contributions the study where this study, which is an important study, where it is available. So all these studies and reports demonstrate one thing in any case, that is that the women are still discriminated in one way or another, even if their number in the profession is still increasing. And then I was thinking about what can the bars do for that, because we can observe this. We can, of course, find that it is not a good way to do, but how can we improve the position? What can we do? Apart of course, also, I think some evolution in the society that we needed to achieve. For the bars themselves, I have a few suggestions. That is, first, to consider a solidarity contribution or mandatory supplementary insurance allowing women lawyers to take maternity leave that is paid. So that will be the group of lawyers, all women and men, who are paying, for example, an insurance company that can then pay for the maternity leave of a female lawyer. To provide also a day nursery in courthouses. I think some bar associations have that, and I think that can be important, where the parents can bring also the children while they are pleading or working in the courthouses. To adopt time schedules within the courts and the bars also, like for the meetings of the Bar Council, for example, which are compatible with school schedules, for example. That can also be an idea. And then, of course, and always important in the communication, vigorously denounce any form of discrimination or harassment against women and provide a support policy in the event of complaints. I think we have a lack of that, and that we must try to really install that in all bar associations and also, of course, in the law firms themselves. These are a few examples what could or should be done. And then I want now to conclude, and I want to conclude this short presentation, this short contribution in 3 points. First, it is accepted that an anti-discrimination policy, particularly when it comes to gender, is always beneficial to the organization that implements it. And I can also refer to the speech of Mr. Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations. I think it was yesterday or a few days ago. And this is also true from an economic point of view. So let us therefore fight against any drift towards a policy that would call it into question. Second, in our bar associations, we must also campaign for a minimum representation for women. I am for quotas, because I think without that we will not achieve it. I think that, for example, in France, we have a good example of that. And then finally, a perfect equality will only be possible if society also evolves towards it. And we must therefore certainly broaden our fight and raise awareness in society, like Kata says also, in society as a whole, of the need to respect women and their political, economic, and social rights. I thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, I totally agree with you. We need to change mentalities in the society and then go to the bar associations. And I agree totally with you when you say that lawyers and bar association must set an example in ending discrimination in their firms and be the leaders in that field by implementing an inclusive approach concerning women. This is perfect to implement if you want to work on prevention. And to know more about the situation in law firms and in bar associations. I don't know if you are all aware about it. We organize every September a day of women. We celebrate women leaders of the bar in the Women Leaders of the Bar Day. This year it will be on the 11th of September. To hear from these women who are inspirational, like Cato, like Muriel today, what are the challenges they had to face? Why these challenges are there? What did they do to overcome these challenges? What are the recommendations in order to go further and put an end to all these challenges in the legal profession? Yes, we must work on the legal profession also. And the role of lawyers is very important. And that's why in our charter, we talk not only about legal representation before courts for victims of violence, but also on accompanying these victims whole proceedings before getting to court and afterwards, because combating violence is not just before courts, it's a lot to do before and after. So thank you very much for all that you have proposed. Your suggestions, we will take them into consideration and we will include them with in the strategy that I think we are going to work on with Carlo. Thank you so much. And now our speaker, she's inspirational, as I said, as Cato also, she's inspirational. So Muriel Renard-Legrand, she's the president of the CIB, la Conférence internationale des barreaux de tradition juridique commune. She's the president of Bar Associations of Martinique. Elle est bâtonnière de l'Ordre des avocats du barreau de Martinique depuis le 1er janvier 2024. Je ne sais pas si vous êtes la première bâtonnière du barreau de Martinique. Enfin, vous nous le direz tout à l'heure. Elle est également membre fondateur. Elle a été membre fondateur de l'Union des jeunes avocats de Martinique, où elle a été vice-présidente puis présidente de l'Union des jeunes avocats de la Martinique. Et je suis très honorée de vous accueillir et d'avoir accepté notre invitation. C'est la première fois que nous avons une bâtonnière de la Martinique qui est avec nous. Et là, vous occupez un poste qui est important maintenant, votre mandat de présidente de la CIB. Ça peut agir vers ou mener vers un combat contre la discrimination et la violence à l'égard des femmes au niveau des différents barreaux, puisque c'est une conférence qui regroupe beaucoup de barreaux. Donc, je vous remercie d'être avec nous aujourd'hui et la parole est à vous.
Merci beaucoup à tous. Je suis extrêmement heureuse, fière et honorée d'intervenir dans ce cadre-là. Merci beaucoup de m'avoir fait l'honneur de me convier à ces webinaires. I'm very pleased and honored to be here. Alors effectivement, l'enjeu de l'égalité entre hommes et femmes est quelque chose d'extrêmement important, pas seulement pour les femmes, mais pour la société tout entière. Mais pour la société tout entière, parce que des études ont prouvé qu'une société plus égalitaire, eh bien, c'est une société plus heureuse dans laquelle les hommes, les femmes, les enfants sont davantage épanouis, une société où le développement économique et social est également meilleur. Alors, c'est vrai que on doit partir d'un constat qui est celui que partout dans le monde, les femmes sont victimes d'inégalités, de discrimination et de violence. Alors, les inégalités et discriminations en matière d'accès à l'instruction, à l'éducation, en termes de niveau de salaire, de partage des tâches domestiques, en matière de violence également, puisque les coups, les meurtres même dans les cas extrêmes, les violences psychologiques, les violences économiques, le harcèlement, les humiliations, les dénigrements, les isolements sont des phénomènes extrêmement fréquents. Donc, I must express an observation. all over the world, women are victims of inequality, discrimination, and violence. Inequalities and discrimination in terms of access to instruction and education, salary levels, sharing of domestic tasks, and violence, beatings, murders, psychological violence, economic violence, harassment, humiliation, denigration, isolation. Alors, ces phénomènes sont plus ou moins accentués selon la zone géographique. Par exemple, si je vous parle de la Martinique, qui est une collectivité d'outre-mer française, où je vis dans les Caraïbes, eh bien, lorsqu'on compare les statistiques de la Martinique et de la France hexagonale, on se rend compte que les violences et inégalités y sont plus accentuées qu'en France, pour des raisons historiques et sociétales, qui sont le poids de la religion, la promiscuité, la précarité économique et sociale plus grande des femmes. Donc, this phenomena is more or less accentuated depending of the geographical area. For example, if I talk about Martinique, which is a French collectivity, violence and inequalities are more accentuated there than in mainland France for historical and societal reasons. Tolerance of women for violence, weight of religion, promiscuity, economic and social precariousness of women. De manière générale, il faut savoir qu'en matière de droits des femmes dans le monde, certes, des progrès importants ont été faits. Il y a eu la mise en place de dispositifs et de législations protégeant les femmes des violences, une chute de la mortalité maternelle, un accès accru des femmes à l'éducation, voire la parité dans l'éducation des filles dans de nombreux États, et l'augmentation de la représentation des femmes au sein des instances politiques et publiques. Mais en réalité, nous devons quand même faire attention, en dépit de ces progrès, parce que, par exemple, le dernier rapport de l'ONU qui a fait le point sur le droit des femmes 30 ans après Beijing démontre que pour l'année 2024, un quart des gouvernements du monde entier ont fait état d'un recul des droits des femmes. Et c'est vrai qu'on ne peut s'empêcher de penser à la situation des femmes en Iran, en Afghanistan, en Haïti, dans ces pays qui sont quasiment en état de guerre, mais pas seulement, en fin de compte, pas seulement parce que lorsqu'on se rend compte, par exemple, de la situation aux États-Unis, il y a eu un fort recul des droits des femmes, notamment en matière de droit à l'avortement. Donc, ce n'est pas seulement dans certaines zones géographiques qu'on note ce recul, mais également dans des pays occidentaux, dont on n'aurait jamais pensé d'ailleurs qu'ils subiraient un tel recul. Donc, le constat, c'est que on ne peut pas se contenter de dire que les choses vont évoluer favorablement pour les femmes et que peu à peu l'égalité réelle finira par être une réalité. En fait, il ne faut pas cesser de se battre, en fin de compte. Tout cela ne va pas de soi. On a également des stéréotypes qui sont renforcés par le numérique et l'intelligence artificielle. Donc, véritablement, la question qui se pose, c'est que faire pour un monde dans lequel les femmes jouiront des mêmes droits, libertés et chances que les hommes. Et finalement, on se rend compte que cette promotion des droits des femmes, finalement, passe beaucoup finalement par les États et les politiques publiques. Il y a deux modes d'action, à mon sens. Ce sont les modes d'action étatiques, les initiatives étatiques, et puis les initiatives individuelles. Alors, si on commence par les initiatives étatiques, le premier point, c'est qu'effectivement, il faut, je pense, informer sur le sujet. Alors, ça peut sembler complètement basique et élémentaire, mais énormément de citoyens ignorent l'ampleur des inégalités entre les hommes et les femmes. Et c'est vrai qu'une journée comme celle du 8 mars, c'est l'opportunité finalement d'informer tout le monde, hommes et femmes, sur ces inégalités de genre, ces inégalités salariales, ces inégalités de droits. Voilà, et c'est bien de rassembler et de faire des choses comme le webinaire d'aujourd'hui, justement, même s'il n'a pas lieu exactement le 8 mars, pour informer les populations de cela. La deuxième initiative étatique qui pourrait être prise, c'est renforcer la collecte de données pour établir un diagnostic des situations et des besoins sur chaque territoire. Parce que très souvent, effectivement, eh bien, on se borne à dire, oui, voilà, il existe des inégalités entre hommes et femmes, mais trop souvent, en fait, on n'a pas suffisamment de données scientifiques, chiffrées, objectives sur ces inégalités. Le pourcentage d'écart de salaire dans tel ou tel secteur, le nombre de plaintes pour violence, est-ce qu'elles ont tendance à augmenter ou est-ce qu'elles ont tendance à baisser? Par exemple, je lisais quelque chose d'assez erroné et faux il y a peu de temps, en plus dans un grand journal français, où le titre c'était en 15 ans, les violences et harcèlements que subissent les femmes dans les transports en commun ont augmenté de 85%. Alors ça, vous voyez, c'est l'exemple d'une information erronée parce que je ne pense pas que la situation des femmes dans les transports en commun était meilleure il y a 15, 20, voire même 25 ans. La différence, c'est que les femmes déposent davantage plainte et signale davantage ce type de comportement. Mais on ne peut pas comme ça dire il y a 85%. Non, non, il y a 20 ou 15 ans, c'est également une épreuve pour les femmes de prendre les transports en commun. De la même manière qu'aujourd'hui, sauf que ce qui a changé aujourd'hui, c'est que les femmes ne se laissent plus faire, elles signalent, elles déposent plainte pour justement essayer de faire changer les choses et faire bouger les lignes. Le troisième point qui pourrait être intéressant, c'est la mise en place d'observatoires territoriaux chargés de mener des réflexions et expérimentations au sein de chaque territoire et pour fédérer les initiatives. Je crois qu'il est effectivement, certes, c'est très intéressant de faire des initiatives étatiques et qu'à chaque fois, chaque État prenne l'initiative de mener des campagnes ou bien expliquer les choses pour réduire les inégalités. Mais je crois qu'il faut également que par entité, par territoire, qui peuvent être des départements, des comtés, des villes, il faut également que des initiatives soient menées à plus petite échelle, en fait, pour que ce soit plus efficace. Lorsque, effectivement, encore une fois, je parle de la Martinique, hein, que je connais le mieux, si on inclut la Martinique dans l'ensemble de l'Hexagone et de la France, eh bien, ces caractéristiques risquent d'être gommées, alors que nous avons, nous, des spécificités particulières qui font qu'on ne peut pas traiter la situation de la Martinique comme on traiterait la situation d'un département français. Donc, il faut vraiment des observatoires à l'échelle territoriale. Ce que les États peuvent faire également, c'est le financement de programmes qui seront dédiés à l'égalité homme-femme et à la lutte contre les violences et les discriminations contre les femmes. Et ça, il faut vraiment une ambition budgétaire. Le but, effectivement, c'est de lancer des campagnes, hein, souvent des campagnes publicitaires pour justement inciter, informer. Et bien sûr, alors, la difficulté, effectivement, c'est de trouver des financements. Et on sait bien qu'en ce moment d'incertitude mondiale, les États n'ont pas forcément les fonds. Donc, ce peut être des fonds étatiques, mais on peut également penser à des cofinancements entre les entreprises privées et l'État. Ce peut être des financements privés à 100% ou des financements européens. Le but, c'est quoi? C'est vraiment mettre en place et impulser une véritable égalité entre hommes et femmes. Alors, ça peut passer par le financement d'associations qui militent pour l'égalité, ça peut passer par des campagnes de publicité, ça peut passer par des incitations financières à des entreprises pour recruter plus de femmes. Ça peut passer par des aides budgétaires qui sont apportées à des entreprises pour justement booster les salaires des femmes, etc., etc. Donc, le financement, en fin de compte. D'autre part, pour que les femmes puissent accéder à des postes à responsabilité, la maternité ne doit pas être un frein à leur épanouissement personnel. Les États doivent prévoir davantage de places dans les crèches, davantage d'aide à la parentalité, et surtout, il doit y avoir une plus grande inclusivité des sociétés vis-à-vis des jeunes enfants. C'est vrai qu'on constate que très souvent, eh bien, la maternité est un frein pour les femmes, en tout cas, dans l'accès à des postes à forte responsabilité. Et je crois qu'une femme ne devrait jamais avoir à faire un choix entre la maternité et son travail. Parce qu'on sait aussi que les postes à responsabilité, souvent, sont les plus intéressants, ceux où on s'épanouit le plus, où on a des challenges à relever, et devoir renoncer à la maternité pour cela, eh bien, c'est un sacrifice qu'aucune femme ne devrait avoir à faire. Donc là encore, il faut aussi que l'État donne un coup de pouce pour que les jeunes femmes qui ont des enfants et des postes à responsabilité puissent les faire garder plus facilement. Il faut aussi que l'on admette dans la sphère sociale et professionnelle les enfants plus facilement. On sait par exemple que nos amis des pays scandinaves sont très inclusifs à ce niveau-là. Et il y a peu de temps, je lisais un article sur une jeune PDG suédoise qui organisait comme ça un webinaire et qui à un moment s'était interrompue pour allaiter son enfant, qui avait même d'ailleurs fait le webinaire en allaitant son enfant. Bon, dans certains États, je pense, dans certaines sociétés, cela pourrait encore choquer. Mais voilà, dans la société suédoise, ça semble parfaitement naturel et je pense que ça devrait être parfaitement naturel dans toutes les sociétés, en fin de compte. On peut être directrice, présidente, PDG d'une grosse société et en même temps, on est mère. C'est parfaitement compatible. Il faudrait également prévoir des programmes de prévention par l'éducation à l'égalité homme-femme, inculquée dès le plus jeune âge, notamment auprès des garçons, à qui il faudrait inculquer la notion de partage des tâches domestiques, tout ça pour lutter contre les stéréotypes de genre. Non, les femmes ne sont pas dédiées, n'ont pas de gènes spécifiques qui font qu'elles sont bonnes en cuisine, en ménage ou en repassage. Pas du tout. Mais ça passe par l'éducation et ça passe également par l'éducation des femmes. Parce que très souvent aussi, il faut faire notre mea culpa, les femmes également contribuent à diffuser ce genre de stéréotypes parce qu'elles font une différence dans l'éducation entre leurs filles et leurs fils. Donc ça aussi, il y a aussi des actions non seulement étatiques, mais individuelles à mener pour que, voilà, on puisse lutter contre les stéréotypes. Alors les stéréotypes, c'est pas seulement ça, c'est aussi si un jeune garçon veut s'habiller en fée lors d'une soirée déguisée, bah non, oui, il n'est pas obligé de s'habiller en cow-boy, en indien ou en policier. Un jeune garçon qui se déguise en fée ou en princesse, bah non, ça ne doit pas choquer. Donc là encore, il faut lutter contre ce type de stéréotypes. Un des moyens également, c'est aussi l'éducation des jeunes à la sexualité par des personnels formés. On sait très bien que avec les réseaux sociaux, les jeunes ont accès à la pornographie de manière extrêmement facile. Et on sait que ce milieu-là véhicule des modèles de relations sexuelles entre hommes et femmes fondés sur la domination masculine, avec des contenus qui pérennisent le message selon lequel les hommes auraient des besoins sexuels irrépressibles que les femmes auraient l'obligation de satisfaire. Donc là encore, ce type de représentation véhicule des messages désastreux parce que très souvent, effectivement, vous avez des jeunes hommes qui ont été nourris finalement à ce type d'image et qui ont des relations avec les femmes et des relations sexuelles assez désastreuses parce qu'ils pensent que la vraie vie, c'est comme les films pornographiques. Or, ça n'a rien à voir et les femmes n'apprécient absolument pas ce genre de comportement. Alors, un des moyens également, c'est pour lutter contre la sous-représentation des femmes au sein des sphères de pouvoir, eh bien, il faut favoriser l'accès des femmes à la vie publique, renforcer la parité au sein des instances politiques. Donc, ça passe aussi par les femmes. On a envie de dire, mesdames, il faut vous présenter à des élections, même si pour les raisons que je viens d'expliquer, parfois, ça peut être difficile. Alors, les États peuvent lutter contre ça par des lois sur la parité, tout simplement. C'est monsieur Alex Talon tout à l'heure qui en parlait, qui disait qu'il était favorable au quota. Alors j'y suis favorable également parce que effectivement, il y a que comme ça finalement qu'on parviendra de manière un petit peu forcée à impulser de l'égalité dans certaines sphères politiques. Je rappelle que en France, on n'a jamais eu un chef d'État femme. C'est dramatique. Aux États-Unis non plus, d'ailleurs, on a failli. Mais voilà, il y a encore des pays où les femmes n'ont pas accès aux plus hautes sphères de l'État. Et là encore, on doit le regretter. Et enfin, il faut renforcer les législations pour combattre les discriminations et inégalités. Alors, ça passe par la lutte contre les discriminations, la pénalisation aussi de cela. Les discriminations doivent être sanctionné pénalement, à mon sens. Alors effectivement, on a toujours des difficultés de preuve, hein, c'est toujours difficile, mais il est encore inadmissible que des femmes qui occupent les mêmes postes que certains hommes, eh bien, aient encore des différences de salaire. À travail égal, salaire égal, ça doit être gravé dans le marbre. Alors, tout ça, ce sont des initiatives bien sûr étatiques, mais il faut savoir aussi que les initiatives individuelles doivent être mises en avant. Et comment? Ça peut être, ça passe par la mise en avant des femmes inspirantes qui doivent servir de modèle. Alors, c'est pas du tout, parce que je dis, c'est pas du tout pour se mettre en avant ou se valoriser ou quoi que ce soit, mais c'est vraiment, si vous voulez, quelque chose qui doit, je pense qu'il faut qu'on pense à nos filles, à nos petites filles dans ces représentations. Par exemple, je vais vous donner un exemple qui est le mien. Je suis bâtonnière de la Martinique, mais je suis seulement la 6e bâtonnière de la Martinique. Et alors, quand on traduit bâtonnière en anglais, on dit President of Bar Association, ce qui est un thème asexué. Mais en français, on parle de bâtonnier. Et la plupart de mes prédécesseurs, en fait, on les appelait Madame le bâtonnier. Et moi, j'ai tenu à ce qu'on m'appelle Madame la bâtonnière, qu'on féminise ce nom-là, parce que pour moi, féminiser, c'est justement imprimer dans l'idée d'autrui, dans l'idée des gens, que le poste est occupé par une femme et que les femmes peuvent l'occuper. Et lorsque je me fais appeler bâtonnière, je pense être une source d'inspiration pour mes jeunes consoeurs, pour les petites filles martiniquaises, parce que la Martinique est encore une société assez machiste. Donc, c'est important également de féminiser, de servir d'inspiration pour justement inciter les jeunes femmes, les petites filles à se dire, bah oui, mais moi aussi j'ai envie de faire ça, je veux faire ça et je ferai ça. Parce que c'est important. Et si on parle de la CIB, la CIB, elle existe depuis 1985 et je suis la première femme présidente de la CIB. Il n'y en a jamais eu avant et ça peut presque faire sourire lorsqu'on sait que c'est quand même un organe qui se bat pour l'état de droit, l'égalité entre hommes et femmes. Voilà. Avant moi, il y a eu 2 femmes qui ont essayé de l'être et à chaque fois, elles se sont fait coiffer au poteau par des hommes. Donc, c'est vrai que c'était très important pour moi d'occuper ce poste et à chaque fois de dire que je suis la 6e femme bâtonnier de Martinique seulement, ce qui n'est pas beaucoup, et la première présidente de la CIB, première femme présidente de la CIB. Et ça, si vous voulez, bon, c'est pas pour ma gloriole personnelle parce que moi, ma personne, elle importe peu, mais lorsque je dis ça, je veux que des jeunes femmes, des étudiantes, des jeunes filles, des petites filles se disent, ça, c'est ce que je veux faire et je le ferai. Voilà, et ne se disent pas finalement, que il y a des postes qui sont pas accessibles pour elles. Ça, pour moi, c'est important. Alors, autre initiative individuelle, il faut aussi, dans la vraie vie, dans la vie de tous les jours, s'exprimer et ne pas rester silencieux face à une humiliation, une remarque sexiste, une injustice dont on est victime. Alors, ça peut ne pas être évident. Ça peut demander effectivement un certain courage, mais je crois qu'il faut aussi l'exprimer. Ou bien, si on est témoin d'une situation qui ne nous plaît pas, dans un contexte qui ne nous plaît pas, il faut savoir aussi quitter la table, se dire non, ça c'est inadmissible, je ne peux pas l'admettre, cette différence qui est faite, je ne peux pas rester dans un tel contexte. Et ça, effectivement, ce sont des petites batailles qui sont menées chacun au niveau individuel, mais elles sont importantes. Et puis, autre initiative individuelle, prendre la parole, militer, se présenter à une élection. Il faut aussi que nous, femmes, nous osions. Et par exemple, je peux vraiment avoir l'humilité de vous dire que ce poste de la présidence de la CIB, pour moi, il n'allait pas du tout de soi, en fait. Pas du tout de soi. On a organisé le congrès de la CIB en Martinique à la fin de l'année 2024. Et en fait, j'ai tout organisé avec mon équipe. Et c'est vrai que ce poste de président de la CIB, normalement, il va à, effectivement, le bâtonnier du lieu qui organise. Et moi, à un moment, je me suis dit, parce que ce poste était convoité par d'autres hommes de mon barreau, à un moment, je me suis dit, non, mais finalement, c'est pas très grave, finalement, si je ne suis pas présidente. Et finalement, il y a des femmes autour de moi qui m'ont dit, mais non, en fait, non, non, non. Tu as organisé, il n'y a pas de raison que ce poste ne taille pas. Donc, il faut aussi, je crois aussi parfois, se faire aider, s'entourer des bonnes personnes qui vont vous dire, non, 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 tu peux le faire. Parce qu'en tant que femme aussi, on a aussi un petit peu parfois ce syndrome de l'imposteur, cette sensation de se dire, je ne vais pas y arriver, voilà, surtout, enfin, je vous le dis de manière très franche, surtout de ma part, je suis plutôt issue d'un milieu modeste. Et quand on est issu d'un milieu modeste, on a l'impression que parfois, dans les hautes sphères, on n'est pas forcément à sa place. On a toujours ce petit, encore une fois, ce petit syndrome de l'imposteur, où on se dit, je ne vais pas être à la hauteur, c'est pas tout à fait ma place. Et lorsqu'on y est, on se rend compte que, en fait, il faut travailler comme les autres, il faut s'y mettre. Et à ce moment-là, on y arrive. Il y a pas de raison qu'on n'y arrive pas. Et enfin, j'ai envie de dire, le dernier ressort qui recoupe un petit peu ce que je viens de dire, c'est la sororité. Les femmes doivent s'entraider, se croire entre elles, s'épauler, s'aider. Et vraiment, enfin, moi, c'est quelque chose que j'ai beaucoup retrouvé dans la préparation du congrès de la CIB à la fin de l'année, où voilà, des consoeurs m'ont dit, mais voilà, tu dois préparer ce congrès, on t'aide, on est à ta disposition. Et voilà, vas-y, on est avec toi. Et c'est vrai que cette présidence de la CIB, ben, ça m'a permis de faire pas mal de choses. Il y a 15 jours, j'étais au Gabon, à la rentrée solennelle du Gabon. Et lorsque j'en ai parlé à mes consoeurs, etc., elles étaient juste heureuses pour moi. Donc, c'est ça aussi, la sororité, s'aider entre nous de manière à ce que, eh bien, on puisse faire des progrès. Donc voilà, j'en ai terminé. Je voulais juste terminer par une citation de Simone de Beauvoir qui montre à quel point, en fait, nous devons continuer à nous battre pour ça, qui dit « Il suffira d'une crise politique, économique et religieuse pour que les droits des femmes soient remis en question. Votre vie durant, vous devrez demeurer vigilante. » Et je crois que la situation actuelle au travers le monde voilà, illustre parfaitement ce propos. Hein, on a vu ce recul des droits des femmes dans certains pays, les États-Unis, la Hongrie, la Pologne. Et je crois que c'est parfaitement l'illustration de ce que Simone de Beauvoir nous disait. Voilà, je vous remercie de votre attention. Thank you very much.
Yes. Merci beaucoup. Thank you for sharing with us your experience as the bâtonnière or president of the Bar Association in Martinique. Et c'est pourquoi nous organisons ces journées des femmes leaders des barreaux chaque année en septembre. Je vous invite tous le 11 septembre à y assister. Il suffit de s'y inscrire, c'est gratuit. Justement pour mettre en avant l'expérience qu'ont vécue ces femmes et donner l'exemple à leurs consoeurs, surtout les jeunes, pour qu'elles aient confiance en elles-mêmes, comme vous l'avez dit, et qu'elles osent aller de l'avant et ne pas se sentir usurper quelque chose qui ne leur appartient pas. Finalement, elles ont fait les mêmes études, elles ont eu les mêmes diplômes, parfois elles ont été majors de promotion. Donc, qu'est-ce qui empêche cela? Il suffit d'avoir confiance en elles-mêmes et savoir que oui, on peut y arriver. Et c'est ça qui est important, donner l'exemple. Et je vous félicite pour ce que vous avez fait. Je félicite la Martinique d'avoir eu déjà 6 femmes bâtonnières, ce n'est pas peu. Et le CIB pour avoir eu la première femme bâtonnière. Je me félicite en tant que membre de l'UIA, nous avons déjà eu 3 femmes présidente de l'UIA.
C'est mieux
Donc
que la
voilà,
CIB.
on va de l'avant. Tout va de l'avant. Et je tiens, même si je vais prendre un peu de temps, à relever aussi une mesure que nous avons prise à l'UIA. En général, c'est surtout en français. There's something that you can understand if we speak French, not English. In English, you say, find a lawyer. It's a lawyer, a woman or a man. But in French, you have the difference between female and male. So on the website of the UIA, there was trouver un avocat. Et maintenant, si vous allez sur le website de l'UIA, vous avez trouvé une avocate. Ça, c'était pas seulement pour mettre la femme face à l'homme, ou ce n'est pas un combat entre hommes et femmes. C'est pour instaurer la parité, un partenariat à part entière entre les hommes et les femmes partout, et surtout dans la profession légale, on doit donner l'exemple aux autres professions. Et voilà, je voulais juste parler de cela. Je ne vais pas prendre plus de temps, mais je tenais à soulever cette que nous avons pris et dont je suis vraiment très contente. Je vous remercie beaucoup pour votre intervention, pour vos suggestions. Nous allons les prendre également en considération et merci d'avoir été avec nous. And now, let's all welcome Mark Evans. He is the Vice President of the Law Society of England and Wales. And thank you very much for your availability. I know you are very busy, so welcome to our webinar. Mark, you have been a Law Society Council member since 2015, representing the constituency of North Wales. You have been also an inaugural member of both the Law Society Board and National Board for Wales, and you had an active role in your local law society since 2010, and you were president of Cheshire and North Wales Law Society in 2014. But you are also the founder of a social running group for the legal community, Legal Runner. Very impressive. So thank you so much for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and it's a real pleasure to follow such distinguished speakers and to be here with you for this presentation this afternoon or wherever you are in the world today. The Law Society of England and Wales always enjoys participating in UIA events, and it was wonderful to be in Paris last October for the annual Congress. And today's topic is incredibly important, especially with what is happening in the world at this present time. And so I'd like to just start by saying the Law Society is very keen to be part of this webinar to uphold our commitment to equality, diversity and inclusion within the legal profession and beyond. And I'll repeat that. The Law Society is obviously keen to uphold our commitment to equality, diversity and inclusion within the legal profession and beyond. As the representative body for the solicitor profession in England and Wales, we represent in excess of 220,000 members, and we're consistently working to promote awareness of gender-based workplace challenges, such as discrimination, pay gaps, harassment, while also advocating for stronger legal protections and compliance within existing laws or for law changes. By joining these discussions today, we hope to drive legal reforms, support women lawyers, and encourage fair workplace policies across the whole legal sector. Events like today's help foster a more inclusive and equitable working environment for us all. And I want to use the time today to achieve two things. Firstly, I'd like to set out the context of where we are with women's rights in the legal sector and how the justice system is working to improve access to justice for women across our society. And secondly, I'll then move on to say what we're doing at the Law Society of England and Wales to improve the environment for both lawyers and, most importantly, the public. So let's start by just explaining what the current landscape here is in the United Kingdom. Improving access to justice is a core focus area for the Law Society of England and Wales, and the availability of legal aid obviously plays a key role in this. And for those that may not be familiar, legal aid is obviously a financial support package from the government, and obviously funding or lack of funding impacts on gender equality. So unfortunately, for survivors of domestic abuse, the current state of legal aid in the UK is disappointing. The Law Society of England and Wales is actively lobbying for change. Since cuts were introduced to legal aid in the United Kingdom in 2013, legal aid has been for assistance related to family breakdown has been severely restricted to just cases involving domestic abuse or child abuse. So to access legal aid for family matters, survivors of abuse must provide evidence of the abuse that they have suffered, which is referred to as the domestic abuse gateway. Not my words. When this gateway was first introduced, it was extremely restrictive. The Law Society supported litigation to challenge those restrictions, which was successful, and we worked with the United Kingdom Ministry of Justice to improve the gateway to allow a widening of access. And we continue to lobby government, both UK government and Welsh government, for further improvements. And I'm sure we're not alone around the world that cuts to legal aid or funding has also increased the number of litigants in person in the family courts, creating a situation where survivors of abuse were being cross-examined by their alleged perpetrator of that abuse, an experience which often serves to re-traumatize those survivors and is completely unacceptable. We lobbied for legal representatives to be appointed by the court in this situation, and this was successfully achieved, and changes to the law through the Domestic Abuse Act was introduced in 2021. As well as successfully influencing changes to legal aid, over the last few years, we've seen us support the measure to give free legal advice to complainants in rape trials. We've welcomed the current UK government's stance on combating violence against women and girls and have been responding to consultations to give our recommendations. These recommendations include creating an automatic entitlement to the use of special measures in court to make giving evidence as stress-free and as dignified as possible for all victims. And when it comes to the solicitor's profession here in the UK, we're incredibly proud that women solicitors make up to 40%, 47% of our membership. I'm also a lecturer at the university, and I can see that those numbers will be increasing significantly over the coming years. There's far more female entrants entering into the profession in the UK. And whilst this statistic obviously is encouraging, we are still lacking when it comes to women reaching partner level or positions of power. And whilst I said that 40% of our membership are women, only 34% represent that at partner level. And that's something that we need to improve here in the UK. And I'm sure that position is repeated throughout. As more female solicitors are being admitted to the profession, we will continue to focus on addressing barriers that female solicitors face throughout their careers. This will make it easy for them to stay in the profession, reach their goals, and advance to those senior positions, something I'm sure we all want to see and succeed in. So we've touched upon briefly legal aid or financial support, and that was being covered, I think, earlier as well in some of the presentations. We've touched upon law reforms for domestic victims of domestic violence and what is happening here in the UK. And this provides a good foundation for understanding the initiatives now that we're working on at the Law Society of England and Wales to advance the rights of women, both for solicitors and, as I stressed earlier, for the wider public. And I'd like to start by highlighting our Women in Law Pledge, an initiative that we helped pioneer and have been promoting since it launched in 2019. And by signing this pledge, law firms commit to senior level accountability for gender equality, setting aspirational targets for women in leadership and fostering an inclusive, bias-free culture. Now, signatories also commit at senior levels to tackle sex discrimination, bullying, and sexual harassment in the workplace. This public commitment ensures that gender equality in the profession remains at the forefront of conversations. We also launched, in addition to the Women in Law Pledge, a toolkit for the women in law back in 2021, a few years after the pledge had started. And this practical toolkit offers important insights into the barriers women face globally in career progression and also provides practical tips for initiating gender equality initiatives. Now, the resources are backed by global research on gender equality in the legal profession and reflect the views of over 700 female lawyers from across 34 international roundtables. So, we have also seen our diversity and inclusion framework, which aims to create lasting change by encouraging firms to establish a purpose, develop a plan, and ensure performance through good governance, transparency, and regular monitoring. And finally, I would like to say today and highlight our Women Lawyers or Women Solicitors Network. This is a dedicated forum which focuses on promoting inclusion and reflecting societal diversity within our profession. Our network supports all women solicitors and aspiring solicitors, while also supporting the communication and implementation of the Law Society's work to ensure that our members' views are not only sought, they're heard, but also addressed. And that aim really is through collective efforts, the Law Society continue to deliver support to close the gaps that persist between male and female solicitors at any level. And in the UK, there is still disparities in the UK gender pay gap. And these are statistics that obviously we need to be still working upon. What we've also seen in recent years, and I just want to highlight the important work of Law Care, the mental health charity for the legal community, is we've seen an uptake now in people seeking help and support. And obviously, stress and anxiety were the most common reasons why people contacted Law Care and made up to nearly 39% of all calls. But also, there's been an uptake in people who have career concerns, which amounted to 15%, and 10% of calls related to workplace bullying and harassment. So for us, obviously, having support mechanisms is important, but we know there's still an awful lot of work that needs to be done. And I hope today I've given you a good overview that the issues that are persisting here in the UK and what we're doing to try and tackle them on behalf of the Law Society. We can't always change government policy, but we must do our best. We must lobby to make sure that everything is on an equal footing and everyone is respected. Some of the things that I've listened to, obviously, in the debate this afternoon, there are key themes that resonate across jurisdictions. Education is key. At an early stage, whether it be in primary or secondary school. And clearly funding is a factor as well, to be able to get advice, to take professional advice and not be put at risk of facing people who are causing the problem. So I hope this afternoon it's given you some insight here from the United Kingdom. I'd like to thank you for allowing us to contribute, and hopefully we may have some questions to follow. But thank you, Elizabeth, and to everyone who's joined today.
Yes, thank you so much, Mark, and thank you also for giving this much importance to access to justice for the survivors. You can survive, which means a lot when we talk about victims of violence or discrimination. And then when you talk now about people who are suffering from harassment in the workplace, and this is also an issue to tackle. And not only women, but maybe women suffer more than others because of the feeling they have that they do not belong there. Maybe they are taking the place of someone else, like Muriel said in her presentation. And you talked about the law. All of you talked about the law. We need to have laws that tackle this issue. But this is a major role for the bar associations to do, and they can do it. So would it be one major element of any strategy of prevention to put an end to discrimination and violence against women in the workplace and elsewhere? And thus, only a good law is a good law is enough, or we need also enforcement. And then enforcement, it does need education and people who are convinced that we need to promote and advance women's rights. What do you think? Mark, I'm asking you the question.
Yeah, I think, I think we need to collaborate across jurisdictions. We also need sometimes to use evidence from other jurisdictions as to what is working or not working. And sometimes it's helpful to show to politicians statistics or information from another jurisdiction to say, look, it is possible, it is achievable. And so I think having forums and associations like the UIA is essential, because you share experiences and, you can then potentially in private maybe lobby your government or party to say, well, look, it's happening in the United Kingdom. Have a look, speak to your counterparts there. It is possible. Or it's happening in France, or it's happening in Mexico, or wherever we may be. So I think sharing experiences, and we all have a common aim. And I think it's important to have this discussion.
Yes. So, Edgat, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I fully agree with what Mark said. Having said that, I also think that any jurisdiction and the legal framework of any jurisdiction is a patchwork of checks and balances. And what looks like protection in one country or more protection in one country, for instance, when I'm talking about the labor law aspect of things, might seem less protected in another country. But then if you factor in other elements in that jurisdiction of how employees are protected against dismissal, for instance, that could balance each other out. So I think what is needed is to talk to lawyers all over the world, as Mark said, to understand what kind of protection is needed and how it could be improved. And the initiative I mentioned of the World Bank group doing a survey among lawyers, a pro bono survey, to understand what level of protection is provided for in their jurisdiction is very useful.
Alex, what do you think about it? You said something about it in your
No, I completely agree with what was said. What is also important is, of course, that between lawyers and across jurisdiction, we can support each other also. It's an exchange of experience, but it can also be, and I think the UIA is also acting so to support some countries, some jurisdictions where there is perhaps more lack on some legal frame for that for anti-discrimination rules. So that's also important, that we can show solidarity between all the lawyers in the world. Yes.
And Muriel?
Yes, I agree with that. Law is obligatory, but it's necessary, but it's not enough. We must improve mentalities, and we must try to change people mentalities.
And yes, so we have already two suggestions that we need to work on. Mentalities, yes, we need to do it, and this is very important. And then the laws. And as all of you said, it's important to know more about what's happening in each country. And the ER being an international association, so I think here we have to, I'm asking the question to Carlo. So what do you think we should try to do at the ER and the Women's Committee? With what we will start? Education, or working on laws, lobbying, or working with the lawyers, members of the ER, and the bar associations, members of the ER, to set the example, starting implementing inclusion and non-discrimination within their law firms?
Well, I think we've received a lot of suggestions. You will allow me, I am rather positively biased by anything that comes from the UK, because it reminds me that I do have a British passport as well as an Italian passport, and I was born in London. So I must say I was impressed by, I've just pulled it down, the pledge. And my suggestion would be the following. I'd like to walk away from today's discussions and presentations and thoughts with something. And at a minimum, I would suggest that maybe you and I, Elizabeth, try to put together a statement summarizing the proposals that have been made. I've written 9 pages of notes here. And of course, we have the materials that I haven't seen yet, but we will be distributed. But I would also suggest, if Mark is in agreement, I would love to work on the pledge, put it into 3 languages, the 3 official languages of the UIA, and even maybe some additional language, and with all the necessary copyright recognition, try to promote it, because if we were to promote this pledge, which is a commitment undertaken by law firms, we would be leaving a very strong signal, giving a very strong signal coming from our speakers today, or one in particular, but the statement the statement should incorporate the main points and the main conclusions of all the speakers today, to whom I must say I'm extremely grateful, because I quite frankly, I had very high expectations, but you have by far exceeded my most optimistic expectations of leaving or ending this seminar with a list of suggestions, 1, 2, 3. I mean, I have so many written everywhere. And plus suggesting we incorporate the pledge as a very, very substantial, well-written piece of work that should be shared with the legal community on a global basis.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carlo. So I don't know if Elisabetta is still here with us. Well, I think that, would you like to add something for any action plan? What would be the priorities in an action plan in the field of prevention? Kato? How to involve the members of the AIJA and the young generation actively, how to make them work actively in combating discrimination and advancing women's rights?
Well, I think what we are doing right now, but perhaps as well during in-person events, what I always like most is our sessions of the Aisha Women Network during our flagship events, because there we actually come together and it gives such a special vibe to talk about these topics in person, and that generates more will to take actual action and take those stories home. We had a session, for instance, during our half-year conference in Luxembourg on loss and how law firms can help lawyers, women, but also male lawyers going through losses and change policies. And this is just one example of how that actually inspires people to go back home to their law firms and talk about it, maybe help drafting a policy like that. So yeah, what we are doing right now, organizing sessions around it and inviting our members to join us.
Okay. And Muriel, par quoi on devrait commencer? Quelle serait la première priorité qu'il faut cibler?
La première priorité, c'est vraiment, pour moi, les politiques publiques qui doivent s'impliquer.
Les politiques publiques, oui. D'accord. Et comment ça va se passer? Comment ces politiques publiques? How? The policy of the state.
Par le lobby, nous devons essayer, enfin, nous avons par exemple nos parlementaires, à qui nous mettons la pression pour faire passer des projets de loi qui favorisent l'égalité, l'inclusivité. Essayer de peser sur eux en disant, on vous a élu à une fonction, ce qu'on aimerait, c'est que vous travaillez davantage pour l'égalité, l'inclusivité, l'éducation, pour une meilleure société de demain. D'accord.
Et vous, Alex? The priority would be what? With what prevention should start?
Yes. For me, a priority, that's because also I see what the situation is an equal representation at different levels of society, but also especially in the bar associations and also in the law firms. I think if we can achieve an equal representation, then we will go to more equality automatically, I think. So that is for me, from my point of view, an important topic.
Well, thank you so much for your participation, for your presentations, for your commitment in combating discrimination and violence against women, and for giving us your suggestions. As Carlo said, there was a lot of suggestions. Many of them are really top priorities. We should start with them, and I think the others would come then. And yes, we will continue to provide our assistance to victims of violence to get access to justice, providing victims of violence an efficient access to justice is a way of combating violence, but also we need to have law which are more tackling the problem of violence and helping victims. Even if they are incriminating the perpetrator, they are not giving any assistance to victims. And you talked about how much victims need to be supported, financially supported. So this is also another aspect of the question that need to be tackled if we want to have a good prevention. So now we have acting upstream and then helping the victims. And within the UIA, we are going to work on establishing a policy or a strategy or an action plan concerning prevention, as we did for the access for justice for women, access to justice for women victims of violence. So thank you very much. I was really glad to listen to you talking about this issue, which is very important for me too. And looking forward to seeing you again in another UIA event and in the annual Congress in Guadalajara, where our main question will be, and our main topic will be, could we talk about sustainable development if there is no inclusion and no equality concerning women? And I'll send you tomorrow, Carlo, the topic that will be the topic of our working session in Guadalajara. There's a lot to do, but as you said, when representatives of many important association of lawyers like yourselves are all involved and all committed to make a difference, a change, then I think, yes, we can do it and we will do it. Thank you so much.